Good evening, everybody. It is 6 p.m. on August 3rd, 2022. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the James City County Planning Commission. Mr. Holt, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers.
Here, present.
Mr. Rogers represents the Berkeley District. Ms. Knoll.
Present.
Ms. Knoll represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. Rose.
Here.
Mr. Rose represents the Roberts District. Mr. Polster.
Here.
Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District and is vice chair to the commission. Mr. Haldeman.
Here.
Mr. Haldeman is an at-large member. Mr. Kropp.
Here.
Mr. Kropp represents the Powhatan District. Mr. O'Connor.
Here.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member and is chair of the Planning Commission. I'm Paul Holt, Director of Community Development and Planning for the county. Sitting to my left this evening is Ms. Liz Parman, our Deputy County Attorney. It's my pleasure to be Secretary to the Commission. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. Before we get started this evening, I'd like to recognize Mr. Richard Bradshaw, Commissioner of the Revenue. He's here, I'm sure, for our discussion later this evening. So thank you for being here tonight, Mr. Bradshaw. First item on our agenda this evening is public comment. Just for anybody who might be interested, later in the agenda this evening under Planning Commission considerations, we are going to talk about AFD renewals. There will be no public hearing for that, so if anybody has any comments for AFDs, we invite you to speak now. And seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to reports of the commission, but we had no DRC or policy committee meetings this past month, so we can bypass that and move to our consent agenda, which is the minutes of the July 6, 2022 regular meeting.
Move to approve.
Second.
So we have a motion to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Our first public hearing scheduled this evening is zoning -22-0001 and SUP-22-0012, 5700 Williamsburg Landing rezoning and SUP amendment. Mr. Wysong, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening to the Commission. Mr. Paul Gerhardt has applied on behalf of Williamsburg Landing to rezone approximately 2.65 acres from the R8 residential zoning district to the R5 multifamily residential district, and to amend the existing special use permit for Williamsburg Landing to include the existing parking lot and gated access as part of this development. At this point in the process, the applicant has requested more time to evaluate and discuss this proposed use and conditions with planning staff. Per the letter within your packet, the applicant has requested a postponement of this case for at least 1 month to allow continued collaboration with planning staff. Staff concurs with the request for postponement and recommends that the Planning Commission postpone this application to the September 7 regular meeting. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Wysong? Mr. Alderman?
Hi, thank you. Could you use your cursor to circle the area that's
Right there. This little sliver that's got the R8 zoning, which is showing up as green on the map.
Thomas, could you sort of do the same by flipping back to the aerial, just so it's a little bit easier to see underneath as well? This is so sensitive.
There we go. I'll try not to click anything here. Thank you, Beth. It's this portion down here. You can see the existing parking lot, and then you've got this access right here. This is the portion that's zoned for R8, and it is being proposed and requested for rezoning to match the R5 zoning that surrounds it.
Thank you. Sure. Any other questions for Mr. Wysong? Thanks. We'll give you the night off and see you in a month. So,
Thank you.
seeing as we opened this public hearing last month and continued it, we'll just continue this on to our September 7th meeting. I don't need a vote or anything, do I?
Liz, do you feel strongly? No,
okay.
we're good.
So we will go ahead. Just, I will ask, since we're not going to open the public hearing tonight, is there anybody here that was intending to speak on behalf of this application for Williamsburg Landing?
Yeah, public hearing was already open, so yeah, if somebody wanted to.
Seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to our next case. So, thank you. Our next case this evening, SUP-22-0008, Williamsburg Crossing, Greenwood Christian Academy expansion. Mr. Reisinger, good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Mr. Mark Thornblum of Greenwood Christian Academy has applied for a special use permit to allow the operation of a school at the Williamsburg Crossing Shopping Center located at 5251 John Tyler Highway. The property is zoned B1 General Business, is designated mixed use on a comprehensive plan land use map, and is located inside the primary service area. Greenwood Christian Academy has operated a school and child daycare center in the Williamsburg Crossing Shopping Center since 2009, when both uses were permitted by right in the B1 district. The existing facility has a capacity of 150 students and is referred to as the main campus on the attached master plan. In 2012, the B1 district was amended and schools became a specially permitted use, at which time the school use became non-conforming. The applicant is requesting an SUP to expand the school within the shopping center by adding another facility in the shopping center referred to as the annex. The annex will have a capacity of 75 students, bringing the total capacity of the school to 225 students. This application does not propose any changes to the building footprint of the shopping center. The applicant intends to have all student pickups and drop-offs take place at the main campus facility. In addition, Greenwood Christian Academy offers before and after school programs, which results in a wider time window for pickup and drop-off. Staff anticipates that the existing vehicular entrances and drive aisles in the shopping center parking lot will be sufficient for vehicle traffic generated by the school. Staff also anticipates that the existing parking lot will provide ample parking for the school use. With the proposed conditions, the school would be permitted to operate in the main campus and annex facilities, bringing the use into conformance with the zoning ordinance. The conditions also limit the school to a total enrollment capacity of 225 students from kindergarten to 8th grade, and hours of operation from 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., Monday through Friday. Staff finds this proposal to be compatible with surrounding development and consistent with the 2045 Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Ordinance. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this application, subject to the proposed conditions, to the Board of Supervisors. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this time, and the applicant is also available. Thanks.
Any questions for Mr. Reisinger?
I should have sent this to you, Mr. Reisinger, but didn't we approve a daycare center across the street?
Correct.
Okay,
About
do
a
they
year
s-
ago.
yeah, do they still intend to use that, or are they closing that down and then moving it over here?
The applicant does not propose or intend to continue with that location, and so all the school use will be on the Williamsburg Crossing Shopping Center property.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. This time we'll open the public hearing, and I have a speaker card for Mr. Thornblum.
Good evening. My name is Mark Thornblum. I am a proud father of three who attend Greenwood Christian Academy. And when you have three kids that go to school there, they put you on the board and give you things to do like work on projects and such. So I'm here to just give you a little information about where we were last year, where we are, and where we plan to go. Joining me this evening is the principal of Greenwood Christian Academy, Mrs. Samantha Welcher, our vice principal of Greenwood Christian Academy, Mrs. Tara Sagman, and Mr. Harold McDonald, who is also a member of our board, longstanding member of our board, and serves as a liaison between the school and our executive sponsor, which is Crosswalk Community Church. We're here to answer any questions that you would have this evening. If we go to the next slide, please. Just real quick, we were here last year where we were applying for a special use permit to operate, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, daycare center and school at the church property located across John Tyler Highway at 5100 John Tyler Highway. We did have that SUP approved, and we did operate and have students at the church. Last year, our intent at the time, this time last year, was to build a new building and to expand our school on property and to continue there. However, a number of things beyond our control, particularly with the site development, really pushed the costs of that project out of our control, and we had to go back to the drawing board. And so, as of today, we have essentially closed that effort to build a building and to continue any operations at the church property. In lieu of that, we are proposing to expand within the current shopping center space and to take on and add about a capacity for about 75 additional students. It'll all be about fourth grade to eighth grade. All of the daycare and preschool operations and younger elementary school will maintain at the existing what we call the main campus. There. So as of right now, we have approval to lease 4 units in the shopping center. The 4 units are all together. They're not adjacent to the current school. They're down and around the corner a little bit. So there will be some walking for students between the main campus where we house our library and our gym and our special use classes like for technology and Spanish, and some of those all are housed at the main campus. So students will just traverse through the covered frontage parking in front of the parking lot there, but not have to cross any major streets or anything. We hired an architect, Matthew Burton Architects out of Newport News. He has provided some initial drawings of our new space, which we'll show you on the next slide. And he's working on construction drawings now, which we will use to collect construction costs and construction bids, which we hope to proceed with in the very near future. So we can go to the next slide. This is a initial layout of our building, and I'll just use this cursor. I'm trying to press any buttons just to give you a quick tour to align you. The right side of the drawing here is the frontage along with the parking area. And if you're familiar with the shopping center, you know if you're standing in the parking lot looking at this building, on your far left you would have Food Lion and then a few small shops, and then Burn Boot Camp has a large sign. And then there are these 4 currently available spots which we're leasing. Those are the 4 units that we will plan to move into. And then right next adjacent on the right side to this spot is the Miracle Ear services and offices there. So we'll be in the middle there. I try to use these black dotted lines to amend the drawing here just to show you the separation of the 4 units. So it's one large unit, which is about 3,400 square feet, and then each of these smaller units are each 1,000 square feet, and we're going to combine all 4 units together to create one space. The main entrance will be a rather small door here. We're going with the philosophy of low profile. We don't plan to have any signage out front or any extravagant banners or anything for security purposes, and also just to kind of keep it as an annex so that folks know that the main entrance of the school is still at the main campus. For security and for privacy, we made it a design feature that none of the classrooms have large glass frontage in them. So as folks walk through the frontage area, they won't be able to, peer in through the windows. There'll be the little slivers of windows that'll have some translucent coverings on them to really prevent folks from looking in and seeing the activities that are going on. It includes 5 classrooms, as you can see, a common area between where we can do some common learning activities, perhaps assemble there for lunch, probably a weekly chapel service as well, but a nice common area, sufficient restrooms for boys and girls, including a staff restroom in the back, a couple of administrative offices. It might say kitchen on this drawing, but it's not really a kitchen. There's no stove or meal prep, just kind of more of a break room with maybe a refrigerator and a microwave, nothing more than that. And then a general work office area for the teachers with a copy and supply storage and such. It also has all of the required utility closets, server rooms, and all of the emergency egress and life safety requirements have been taken into account in this drawing. So that is all I have for you today, but we are here for any questions that you may have, and we appreciate Mr. Reisinger's attention to this SUP. He's done a great job for us, and we look forward to moving forward with the project. Any questions?
Questions? Dr. Rose?
Yeah, I just have one. You mentioned that the pickup and drop off were at the main campus. I just want to confirm that it's going to be safe for the students to walk between these 2 campuses.
Right. So the path is, it's all a continuous sidewalk, so there's no crossing any streets or crossing the
walking
parking
through the
lot.
parking lots.
And it's also covered, so even if it's raining or snowing or bad weather, they're still protected, as they walk through. And it's a rather short walk.
Other questions? I was curious, I'm sorry? Mr. Rogers, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So often, and really, maybe my question should have been, well, Mr. Reisinger was, but one thing I'm just trying to get my arms around is the school is a nonprofit, I'm assuming, right? If this was in our materials, I confess that I missed it, but because this is in my district, and I went down there and I looked at it this morning, it strikes me that nonprofit uses of those spaces, maybe it's Mr. Bradshaw, would pay taxes to the county. So I guess part of what I wonder, is there any consideration that's done in our staffing or planning about the idea that how much commercial space is available? Maybe there's tons, but the idea that you give up space that would otherwise produce income to pay for schools or parks, to support the school. That makes sense.
So I don't think at this point that staff would have a full answer to your question, but the property is designated mixed use on the comprehensive plan, which would support having kind of that mix of uses and services provided to the community. So there might be something we can follow up on in terms of.
Yeah, and I was going to add too, you may recall, so the way the code and our policies currently work, that fiscal impact analysis really only kicks in with new residential units. There's not one for just commercial developments or institutional or any of those.
I mean, my actual impression, because I'm down there a lot, is that those spaces aren't, a lot of times they sit empty for a long time. So I know that when they're empty, they're not producing income on it. I just hadn't seen a discussion of whether, we're trading off a finite amount of tax producing property. And it sounds like we're not. It sounds like the plan envisions that.
Mixed use district. There's that consideration, yes.
Thanks.
Mr. Thornblum, I just had a quick question. Understanding that you're in a commercial district, is there going to be a lot of transitioning? I appreciate your attention to the security. That was going to be one of the questions that I had asked. Is there going to be a lot of transitioning from the one campus to the main campus, or do you anticipate during the course of a day?
I will give you my best answer, but I might have the principal come. But generally, the students that are over there, they'll have physical education maybe once or twice a week. And they'll have a special class, which we call specials, but think about computer and technology, Spanish, art. What they typically do is, in order to minimize, because right now they have to bring them over from the church, so there's a transition there as well. So they lump those together so that when they come over to the campus, they'll do a special, then they'll do PE, and they do that at the end of the day, so that there's only one trip over for that time. And right now that's to minimize the number of bus trips that they have to take from the church over to the school and back. Right. And so I'm going to assume that, and I'm not feeling any burning in the back of my head here. I'm going to assume that philosophy is going to stay the same in order to minimize the amount of trips between the two campuses across those business fronts. Yeah, is that fair? Okay. Yeah, I'm getting nods. So.
Well, you passed today, so yeah. No, I was just curious. Do you all have you had discussions with the landlord too about what your future adjacent neighbors might be? I just I'll stay away from the Mr. Holt told me to stay away from the Virginia code because I'd get it wrong. So, but I am curious. Will you have any input or ability to impact, what may go in next door that may be inappropriate to be, partnered up next to 4th through 8th graders as neighbors? So.
That's a great point, and I don't think we've had those specific conversations about the types of business that would go in. I would hope that we would have a chance to, voice our concerns if we thought that there was an inappropriate business. I guess we would also hope that you might also have a say in that for what businesses come in. A lot of our concern has been, particularly, we want a peaceful and quiet learning environment. And so, like, for example, Burn Boot Camp is right next to us. Now, we know their hours of operation that they are now, but we've also said, well, what happens if they add a lunchtime and they play loud music? So we're kind of anticipating having to deal with loud music. And so within our plans, we're already talking to our architect about what options are there for, say, soundproofing between us and them. And that might come in the form of a required firewall anyway. So we could be okay there. But if not, we're going to go ahead and add some soundproofing there. So if they're playing loud music at lunchtime and our children are taking a test or something, that the distraction will be absolutely minimized. So that's been our main concerns from neighbors' standpoint. But as far as the type of businesses goes and the say that we may or may not have with what businesses come in, I don't think that those have come about.
One question, not necessarily relating to this application, but just as far as your process goes, since the annex is going to be separated to some degree from the main campus, any student movements, regardless of grade level, will there be staff or faculty escorting them as they traverse?
Yeah, we've had ample conversations with our principals, and that's been more or less a ground rule for how the school would operate. And that's not only to satisfy, but our parents would demand that as well, that their children not be allowed to walk from one to another without adult supervision.
I assumed so, but
yeah,
I just wanted to verify
that has definitely been, these kind of conceptual operations that we're talking about have been really amply discussed with our staff and with our principals. So yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Anybody else here to speak on behalf of this application this evening? Seeing and hearing none, we will close the public hearing and open it up for discussion.
Just one other point. I think with 225 kids, that's 225 fewer kids in the public schools, and we have a capacity problem in the public schools. So not only is the financial impact mitigated, it's actually enhanced, I think, by this application. I plan to support it.
Anybody else?
It's a great idea. I think it's a great idea. I've been to the school many times. We used to hold meetings there and so forth, and I think it's very forward-thinking to think about doing something like that instead of building a whole new building or causing people to raise their rent or raise their prices to go to school. And those places down there are empty a lot, especially where they're going. And I think it's great. And the school thing, that's even better. Not having to get a new school.
Well, Greenwood has certainly been an institution. I know my wife and her sister attended it many years ago, and my 4 kids went there when they were younger. So I appreciate all that they've contributed over the years. So. No other discussion. I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve SUP-22-0008 Williamsburg Crossing Greenwood Christian Academy expansion with conditions.
You call the roll, please.
Mr. Krupp.
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Mr. Rose.
Aye.
Ms. Knoll.
Aye.
Mr. Rogers.
Aye.
And Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Our last public hearing this evening is SUP-22-0011, 3004 Ironbound Road Tourist Home. Ms. Condon, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. Mr. Randy Coleman has applied for a special use permit to allow the short-term rental of a 2-bedroom, single-family home at 3004 Ironbound Road. The property is zoned R8 Rural Residential, is designated low-density residential on the Comprehensive Plan Land Use Map, and is located within the primary service area. This special use permit, if granted, would allow for short-term rentals throughout the year. There are no changes to the footprint of the home proposed. Staff finds some favorable factors for this application, such as the presence of adequate off-street parking and that the applicant will obtain the proper licensing and inspections. However, the proposal does not meet the recommendations regarding locations and the owner residing on site for short-term rentals in the 2045 comprehensive plan. Staff finds the proposal incompatible with surrounding zoning and development and not consistent with the recommendations of the adopted 2045 comprehensive plan, and therefore, staff is unable to recommend approval of the application. Should the Planning Commission recommend approval of this application, staff has included proposed conditions for consideration. I am happy to answer any questions you may have, and the applicant is available as well. Thank you.
Much. Questions? Mr. Rogers?
So I noticed, or I believe I noticed that there are 3 adjoining properties that are all short-term approved rentals, unless I read a description that wasn't official. Do you know where I'm going with this?
In the, I apologize, in the,
I'm sorry, I didn't bring my hard paper copy, but
No, you're
I
good.
thought it said that there were 3 short-term rental homes, all very close, either across the street or adjoining.
I apologize, I don't remember the exact locations, but I can definitely get those for you, and I know that there are a few nearby. They all went through before the 2045 comprehensive plan was adopted.
And my question is just, if you know, do each of those, let's say they're not even adjoining, let's just say they're nearby, do those 3 homes all have owners in residence 24/7?
I would need to look back at the specifics of those applications, since none of them have gone through since the 2045 comprehensive plan, or I believe since I've been employed to the county. Sorry.
All right.
You said that one of the points against it was that it's zoned R8 low-density residential. Is it different from the commercial property that the nursery sits on, or is it part of the same property?
So it's zoned R8 rural residential, and both the property for the short-term rental proposal and the nursery are both zoned R8.
Okay. So commercial property, a commercial system sits on.
The nursery is permitted for the R8, yeah.
Mr. Crowe?
Oh, actually, Mr. Rogers asked the question I was going to ask.
I think they're across the street, immediately across the street, if I recall correctly, so.
There is one adjoining too.
Oh, is it? Any other questions for Ms. Condon? Thank you very much. This time I will open the public hearing and invite anybody to speak on behalf of this application. I know Mr. Coleman's here if you have any questions.
Do you happen to know about the adjoining properties?
I do. Properties directly across the street, and then adjoining, if you were to turn into the property to the left.
Both the owners?
They do not. But the adjoining one next to is kind of separated from the house where they do.
Our notes, it said you do have a staff member that lives either at one of the adjoining properties? Did I read that correctly?
I have a staff member that lives directly behind the nursery there at Hickory Signpost Road, yes.
And the nursery is open 7 days a week, is it, Mr. Coleman?
Correct.
So there's a staff at the nursery as well as living behind the nursery?
Absolutely.
How late do you close?
Staff arrive in the morning around 7, and then we close at 5, so somebody's there till about 5:30. Sunday, we're open 11 to 4, so by 4:30, somebody's gone.
Questions? Thanks, Mr. Coleman. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak on this application? Seeing and hearing none, I will close the public hearing and turn it over to my colleagues. Crop?
I'll just kick it off. You know, for years prior to this latest comp plan update, we've been grappling with the issues of short-term rentals, and we thought we would try to put performance standards into the comprehensive plan, even though they're not in the ordinance, that would sort of safeguard residential neighborhoods. But we're still falling short. It's too vague of a concept, in my opinion, because again, my opinion, the intent of our tweaks were to protect residential neighborhoods, and the performance standards do that. But there are so many oddities that don't apply to residential neighborhoods. And just a couple months ago, we approved a short-term rental on airport property because we said it was an ancillary use for the airport, even though there was nobody living in the residence. And now an applicant has come forward with and I drove around the site the other day, and I mean, the house is maybe 40 feet or so from the nursery itself. It's right on Ironbound Road. It doesn't really lend itself to a residential use, and this is where I think we're running into difficulties interpreting the performance standards while also trying to be equitable to everybody. And so I think, to me, this case does not stray all that far from some of the rationale we used to approve the airport short-term rental property. And so my inclination is to support this particular application. And so I will probably do that. But that's the dilemma. I think we have a comprehensive plan that is more strict than the ordinance, and we've built in performance factors that we're trying to protect residential communities, but this is not a residential community. And so that's where I see some disconnects, and that's why I'll support this application.
Ms. Knoll?
I went out and met with Mr. Coleman, so he showed me all over the property, because you didn't ask if I'd been out there, so I have been. And I believe, like Mr. Kraft, this is not a residential property. This is not a residential area, and the fact that he's surrounded by 3 that already have been approved out of the prior comp plan, that doesn't make any difference to me. I think that this should be allowed because it's not residential. It's not someplace where somebody's going to come and live there with their kids and spend the rest of their lives. It's somebody's going to come and rent for a week or a weekend or whatever and enjoy the area and leave. And so there's no kids in the neighborhood that I could see. And the fact that he has people, that Mr. Coleman has people there most of the day, should anything happen or anything get out of line, that's another positive, because we've wanted people to be on the property, which I think safeguards a lot of the problems that happen and so forth. So I'm absolutely behind it, as Mr. Kraft.
Dr. Rose?
Okay, I could go ahead. I also met with Mr. Coleman. I had a chance to see the property, and I definitely agree with everything that's been said. I will add, one of my considerations when thinking about short-term rental properties is whether it's taking a house out of the market in an already low-stocked market. And again, I don't think this is one of those houses. This isn't a property that a private owner would want to buy and live on, because it's basically a house that sits in the parking lot of this commercial venture. So between that and then comparing it to the airport property, this one seems to be, even compared to that, a better use of a tourist home. The one consideration seems to be that nobody's living on property full time, and with the airport there wasn't going to be that at all, but here, at least in this case, there is a staff member that lives just adjacent to that, so that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable as well. So I think this is a very reasonable use of this property, and I intend to support it.
Bolster?
I got conflicted over this like I did the airport, just simply because of what we put into the comp plan, trying to do that. But I reconciled myself to the airport in that the guidance that we put into the comp plan is to help us, and it's not written in concrete. And so therefore, you have to kind of depend upon the judgment of what you see in each case. And in this particular case, the one point that it was in favor for me was that we've already approved 3. And underneath the conditions that we've approved those, at least I recall the one that I voted on, was it was on a main arterial road, which is where it was, and the resident was next door for it. Now, I did have a concern about this, and it's kind of the point that Rob brought up, is we have an affordable housing problem. And this takes us off the market for it. And but I don't know that we're ever going to solve that for it. And so in fairness to the landowner, if we've already got 3 in the neighborhood and it's a judgment call on this thing, I just soon vote in favor of it because I think it's a smart thing to do, just simply because we have to use common sense over these, even though we've put some things together. And we have to apply it to the case. So I intend to support it.
Mr. Rogers?
Right, it's starting to dogpile just a little bit here, and with full disclosure, I don't think Mr. Coleman remembers me, but you saved me from a horrible tree many years ago, and I think you were a police officer. So I'll just put that out there. It's not swaying what I was about to say. What strikes me, I'm also over there a lot. You live close to me. The protection I think that is offered by saying somebody lives in the home, I wasn't here when you Brainiacs put that together, but I mean, to me, that's protecting a situation where I live in Miami and I have these things all over the country, and they're empty and they're roach-infested investments of mine, whereas this one is so combined with the nursery, it just seems like there's going to be people are going to notice everything about how that house is being maintained. And so that was just behind my initial questions was I think in this particular case, not being owner occupied for me is not really a factor if the business is right there like the airport was. So I also intend to support it.
Mr. Rogers? Alderman?
I too plan to support it, but for all the reasons that have already been discussed. But just to remind everybody, these are 2 separate parcels, the nursery and the applicant's parcel here that we're talking about. And one can be sold off separate from the other. The business can change. The larger nursery parcel could be turned into housing at some point. And so the notion that there will always be forever and ever employees of the nursery looking out for this may not pan out. Staff absolutely got it right. This is not consistent with a comprehensive plan, but I'm going to support it.
Thank you. I was going to bring up some of the same issues or some of the same facts that Mr. Haldeman brought forward, that these are 2 separate parcels and can be treated separately. They're not one and the same. I too struggle with it, but again, I think I've been fairly consistent in my opposition to these because here is one more opportunity where we're depleting the housing stock of the county. So this is an 800 square foot home, which would be a good starter home or an opportunity for a rental. In fact, one of the letters that we got in support of the application said that everybody needs a place to live. So, I feel strongly about that. We have so many homes that are in HOAs in this community, and for the most part, they are prohibited from having short-term rentals. So that leaves homes outside of these communities that are available for workforce type housing. So I intend to remain fairly consistent with where I've been these years and vote in opposition to it. So I will come out from under the dog pile at this point. So, and look for a motion.
Can I just make an additional comment,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind? And not because I know we've tossed around this affordable housing inventory for a while, and one of my concerns about that is at what point do you have government overreach? That if short-term rentals are allowed in James City County, At what point is it government overreach to say, we think a better use of your home is not a short-term rental, but to put it on the market? And so I guess where I come from on that is to say either don't allow short-term rentals in James City County, or, but don't, from a government standpoint, tell an applicant that we think they should do something with their property. And it's a thorny situation because there is, to your point, definitely an affordable housing shortage in James City County.
But we did, as a counter argument, say through the last comp plan, this is how we want to approach this. And so we're taking that approach and saying, we're going to move that aside because we don't agree with it. And then why did we do that last year, is my point.
Yeah, it's a dilemma, and I don't think we've quite found the right answer to the short-term rental issue in the county, that's for sure. But
Just to pipe in on that, is I'm tired of bouncing my head up against these things when in fact the real issue is that when this becomes an SUP, it's forever and ever. And at some point, I brought this up before, we want to see a change in that, so that if Mr. Coleman goes out of business and there's nobody there, it could go back on the market to be used for something else. But at the same token, we have approved others of the same. And it's back to a fairness thing, and the overreach pieces, you're exactly right. So I still campaign for the idea that I hope that the legislature turns that around so that it doesn't go in perpetuity. And then we wouldn't have such a problem with trying to adjudicate these things in a fair way.
exactly right. No, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve SUP 22-0011, 3004 Ironbound Road Tourist Home, subject to the conditions.
Thank you. Motion to approve, Mr. Holt?
Mr. Crop.
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Mr. Rose. Ms. Knoll.
Aye.
Mr. Rogers.
Aye.
And Mr. O'Connor.
No.
Thank you. Motion passes.
So, thank you very much. Now we're up to Planning Commission considerations, 2022 agricultural and forestal district renewals. Just as we move forward on this, we're going to do this as one roll call for all 12 applications unless somebody decides would like to withdraw one. So, Ms. Costello, good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. In 1977, the Virginia General Assembly created the Agricultural and Forestal Districts Act, which created a process whereby local governments and landowners can protect and enhance agricultural and forestal land. The AFD Act allows property owners to voluntarily establish agricultural districts, forestal districts, and districts that contain a mix of agricultural and forestal lands. Since the AFD program began in James City County in 1986, it has grown to 13 agricultural and forestal districts, representing nearly 20% of all total land area in the county. 12 of the 13 districts are set to expire in October of this year. As required by state code, the county must review all established AFDs prior to their expiration. During this review, districts must be continued, modified, or terminated. State code also provides that all AFD property owners have an opportunity to withdraw any or all of their property from the AFD during the renewal periods. The Croker District currently consists of 28 properties totaling approximately 1314 acres. The Barn Swamp District currently consists of 34 properties totaling approximately 1,838 acres. The Cranston's Pond District currently consists of 6 properties totaling approximately 774 acres. The Mill Creek District currently consists of 39 properties totaling approximately 3,276 acres. The Gordon Creek District currently consists of 33 properties totaling approximately 3,055 acres. The Christensen's Corner District currently consists of 7 properties totaling approximately 1,179 acres. The Yarmouth District currently consists of 13 properties totaling approximately 2,142 acres. The Gospel Spreading Church District currently consists of 8 properties totaling approximately 1,133 acres. The Armstead District consists of 4 properties totaling approximately 311 acres. The Carters Grove District currently consists of 2 properties totaling approximately 307 acres. The Pates Neck District currently consists of 4 properties totaling approximately 755 acres. For all of these districts, staff has not received any withdrawal requests and no changes are proposed to the conditions. The Hill Pleasant Farm District currently consists of 3 properties totaling approximately 346 acres. Staff has received a request for a partial withdrawal of 42 acres from the district. No changes are proposed to the conditions. At its July 21st meeting, the AFD Advisory Committee voted 6-0 to recommend the continuation of the districts to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. Staff finds these districts to be compatible with the requirements of state code and surrounding development, as well as consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. Staff also recommends that the Planning Commission recommend renewal of these AFDs for a period of 4 years to the Board of Supervisors, subject to the conditions included in the respective staff reports. Staff will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Ms. Costello, any questions? That was easy. So there's no public hearing for this, so we can go right into discussion on this if anybody has comments or.
Just in the interest of transparency, Mr. Chairman, I just want to state that the property my wife and I own is in the Mill Creek AFD, but that doesn't, in my opinion, pose any conflict or would not hamper my ability to vote on this particular project.
Any discussion? Mr. Polster?
Preserving the rural character and protecting the environment are not new issues, and the county has an existing toolbox of programs, green space and conservation easement programs, both public and private. For example, there are AFDs in both the Yarmouth and in the Gordon watershed that have conservation easements through the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. The issue itself had some special attention as we went through the comp plan. And I think we took a good look at what we were trying to do for it. There's a story behind my email that I sent to you all and asking for your support and on the recommendation that the board resurvey the individual AFD districts in the 2026 cycle and look at other methods to compensate those AFD landowners. As I said in my email, I didn't think that we had a statistically valid survey for the number of folks that we had. There's 130 landowners and we got something like 20 responses. But I think we ought to look at the individual districts themselves, and to that end, you saw in the email, there's a real difference between the agriculture and the Forestal. It's a 30-year effort for a forest for it with 10-year cycles. It seems to me to make sense, just like the Wright Island is 10 years. The story that I wanted to talk has to do with a series of studies that are at the heart of looking at ways to protect and preserve the rural character and environment of James City County. These studies were the 2014 Strategy for Rural Economic Development, the 5-year study for capturing value of the Lower Chickahominy, and the 2022 Natural and Cultural Asset Plan. These studies are overlapping findings and recommendation strategies, for example, ecotourism and agrotourism, to try to help that portion of the economy. A common theme is that the development and future growth projections have a high potential for cumulative and secondary environmental impacts on our watersheds. The tidal wetlands of the Yarmouth and Gordon watershed are the 2 largest relatively undisturbed wetlands on the lower peninsula of Virginia. A natural heritage ecologist described the Lower Chickahominy as nearly pristine. The Yarmouth and Gordon AFD districts make up a significant portion of the Yarmouth and Gordon watersheds, and property tax offsets help landowners, but it's not enough to pass, and past studies have made marginal headway over the years. Now, I asked the question about what that value tax estimate was, and I had my own estimate. And I wish we would have had a definitive answer to be able to show the citizens of this county exactly the amount of money that we believe that these lands are worth for it, but we did not receive that answer to that question. In 2021, Virginia took in $227.6 million during their first year of selling the forest carbon credits to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative market. 64%, or about 50,000 acres of JCC, is forest, and a majority of the 18,000 AFD district acres are in forest. The 219 Healthy Watershed Forest Conservation Project Phase 3 and Carbon Sequestration Report states that the potential of $106 an acre every year over 30 years through the sale of forest carbon sequestration credits. Maybe we should try to add foreign carbon sequestrations to the toolbox, which is the other part of my recommendation. Having said all of this, I do support the AFD redistricting thing and will vote for it. Thank you.
Mr. Bolster?
I
Ms.
just
Knoll?
have a question about the one where they want to take out 45 acres. It's in the middle of it. What would be the reason behind that? Do you know, Paul?
There's a land use case that's been filed for development within that hole of the donut.
Okay, because I couldn't figure out why somebody would do in the center. Okay.
And they're proactively taking it out because in cycle, you can do that as a matter of right versus it out of cycle where it needs Board of Supervisors approval.
Mr. Crowe?
I just wanted to compliment Mr. Polster. He always comes to the table with a wealth of facts and a wealth of research, and I appreciate that. And I do agree with the recommendation in his email that we look at putting other items in the toolbox, such as carbon sequestration. I think that's becoming more and more important of an issue, and you identified some jurisdictions that have active programs along those lines. And I think everything we could do to help in that effort of reducing the carbon footprint is very good. I must admit I'm a little on the fence about the changing the term from 4 years to a longer period, but you know, if there is a resurvey, then there could be some data that would either validate and say the odds of people not wanting to put their land in an AFD for an extended period is a detriment, or that may be a moot point. But I thank you for your research on that, and I do support that recommendation, particularly about carbon sequestration.
Thank you.
Any question? Mr. Bradshaw took time to come tonight. Any questions for Mr. Bradshaw? Or Mr. Bradshaw, did you have anything to add? So you got all the numbers for Mr. Polster?
Please,
there you
tell
go.
us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stuck together.
And I will say these are hot off the presses. They were printed this morning. Numbers that you have there, they are the actual benefit that goes to the landowners for land use valuation of property within the AFD that would not be available to them under other programs. So this is the actual benefit to the landowner for going into the AFDs. You will note that Carter's Grove is a big zero. Reason for that, they have a valuation based on conservation easements on both pieces of property. So whether they're in an AFD or not, same tax. Nearly between 20 and 25% of the parcels within the AFDs do not receive a tax benefit for being a part of the AFD because they would qualify for the same tax rate under other programs. I hope that answers your question.
Well, it
Dr.
does.
Polster.
It makes the point that over a 4-year period, 2,270,408, it's cheap for a conservation easement for 4 years. It honestly is. And that's why I made the comment that I don't think it's enough. Not in terms of the tax break, but we ought to look at different ways to be able to reimburse those landowners for the conservation value of their properties. And that was the point of my statement. So I thank you very much for being able to definitively say what we don't spend enough on.
Well, again, as we were saying, this doesn't take into account, this is basically comes up to the tax benefit for the timberland that is associated in those AFDs. Agricultural land, somebody has a big cornfield, that's going to qualify without being in the AFD, and so that number is not in this figure.
That's why the carbon sequestration issue, because of the amount of land we have in forestry. And hopefully the legislature will take some of the recommendations that were given to them last year to start looking at agricultural and marshland sequestration credits once again. But thank you very, very much,
All right,
Mr. Bradshaw.
And if you need anything further, Mr. Polster, please give me a shout.
I will do that, sir.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Bradshaw.
You make an
Appreciate it.
excellent doorman.
Don't stop.
I, for one, personally am okay with the 4 years, simply because we've seen in recent years that folks trying to pull property out of the AFD don't necessarily qualify for those hardship exemptions. So, you know, much to your piece about overreach of government, I think to put it in for a longer period of time, you know, could potentially, you know, handcuff a property transfer or an owner, because we certainly learned that the sale of the property doesn't qualify it for that hardship exemption. So, you know, I think that it becomes a restriction that is sort of cumbersome. And, you know, my personal opinion is I don't think that the survey was intended to be a scientific survey. Well, hang on, just hear me out 1 second, because, you know, we got about a 15% response, which I think beats with the response that we got for the comp plan, and we made a lot of decisions based on less than 15% of the population responding. So, you know, I think it was just meant to be sort of I mean, if I understand correctly, it was just a postcard that was sent and was consistent with what we did back in 2016, 15, 16
One of the
timeframe?
earlier renewals, it matched in scope and scale of how we did it before.
You know, so, I mean, I think it was designed to create awareness and elicit some feedback. So I don't know that it was intended to be hard and true, you know, and I know that's counter to your DNA, Frank, but
Oh, when you got a recommendation to the board based on that survey of 4 years, it ought to be statistically significant. And oh, by the way, we had 1,900 and some odd folks that answered the survey for the comp plan, which is what I based my judgment on when we did those things. And that was statistically significant, sir. Some of the other ones, I grant you they weren't.
I understand, so not arguing, so.
Right.
So. Any other discussion? Before I look for motions, anybody want to remove any of these from an approval? And hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve all 12 as submitted. Mr. Polster?
I'll make a motion to approve all 12 AFD districts provided by staff with a recommendation to the board that they relook the survey in the next cycle, and in fact, they look at carbon sequestration as a potential way of offsetting some of the costs associated with it, and that Mr. Bradshaw's paper be forwarded to the board for information, because I think it's very illuminating for them to see that it's a minuscule amount of money for the good that it does for the county. And it's a way of us to tell the folks of the county that we are doing something more every year when we do this, in terms of protecting the rural character and the environment.
We do that as part of a cover memo to the board is,
Yes, so as I understood the motion, those three caveats were included as part of the motion, so that is what, in addition to all the other full meeting minutes and the whole discussion, those three caveats will be included as part of the motion, as part of that, and then the ensuing vote and the recommendation up to the board.
any objections to those added conditions? So, seeing and hearing none, it won't be a roll call, it'll just be a motion, so we've got a motion, so all in favor?
Aye.
Oh,
Can we do the one roll call but for all of them?
we can do whatever you tell me to do, so.
That'd be-
Okay.
That'd be great.
I
That would be
apologize, so-
All-inclusive, subject to the one motion for the 12 districts, and I can call the roll.
There we go, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Crop?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Mr. Rose? Aye. Ms. Knoll? Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
And Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. So, we're up to Planning Director's report. Mr. Holt,
Nothing additional this evening.
any questions of Mr. Holt? So, seeing and hearing none, we are at Planning Commission discussion and requests. Any comments, questions?
No, sir.
Seeing and hearing none, we will,
Just a quick reminder, no board meeting this month, and we will have policy committee next week, so the agenda the packet materials will be coming out soon.
Dr. Rose, you picked a good month, so. So, thank you, everybody. I will entertain a motion to adjourn to our September 7th meeting.
So moved.
So, all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.